Picture this. You're a god, immortal, powerful, worshipped by millions. One day you consult an oracle and learn the exact moment of your death, the weapon, the enemy, even the number of steps you'll take before falling. You have centuries to prepare. What do? The obvious answer: try to prevent it. Capture your prophesied killer. Bind them, imprison them, remove the threat entirely. It's logical. It's what any rational being would do. The Norse gods did exactly that, and in doing so, they guaranteed the very apocalypse they sought to prevent. This is the story of Ragnarok, but it's not the story you think. It's not about inevitable fate or mystical destiny. It's about how the gods of Asgard, in their attempts to escape prophecy, created a self-fulfilling cycle where every precaution became a cause, every chain forged became a future weapon, every prisoner made became a vengeful enemy. Odin knew a wolf would devour him, so he captured the wolf as a pup and bound it with magical chains. That binding filled the wolf with rage that would drive it to kill Odin specifically because he'd been imprisoned. Thor knew a serpent would poison him, so Odin threw the serpent into the ocean where it grew large enough to encircle the world. That exile created the monster Thor would have to fight. Here's the revelation that transforms everything. Ragnarok wasn't inevitable until the gods tried to prevent it. The apocalypse was a choice made by beings so committed to control, so convinced they could escape consequence, that they built their own funeral pyre one precaution at a time. But there's something even more profound hidden in this myth, something the Vikings understood that we've forgotten. Sometimes the only choice that matters isn't whether you can avoid the end, but how you face it when it comes. Tonight, we trace the complete arc of Ragnarok, from a single death in a golden hall to the burning of 9 worlds, to the strange, hopeful rebirth that followed. We'll see how each event connects, how each choice compounds, how the machinery of fate was actually the machinery of consequence. Let your breathing slow, settle into darkness, and prepare for a journey that begins not with the end of the world, but with the moment the gods made it inevitable. Part 1. The Architecture of Doom. The Cosmic Structure. Before we can understand how the world ended, we must understand what world we're talking about, because the Norse cosmos was nothing like the universe we imagine today. 9 realms existed, all connected by or supported upon Yggdrasil, the world tree. But calling it a tree is like calling the ocean some water. Yggdrasil was a cosmic structure so vast that its branches stretched beyond mortal comprehension and its roots delved into the deepest possible foundations of reality. 3 great roots supported everything. The first reached into Asgard, home of the Aesir, the warrior gods who had conquered their way to dominance. The second stretched to Jotunheim, realm of the giants, those ancient beings of chaos and untamed nature who existed before the gods and would, in their way, outlast them. The third descended into Niflheim, the primordial realm of ice, mist, and the dishonored dead. At the base of the root in Asgard sat the Well of Urd, and beside this well dwelt 3 beings more powerful than any god, the Norns. Their names carried the weight of time itself. Urd, meaning that which has become, or fate. Verdandi, meaning that which is becoming, or present. And Skuld, meaning that which should become, or debt guilt. These 3 sisters sat at their loom, weaving the fates of all beings, from the mightiest god to the smallest insect. Every day they drew water from their well and mixed it with earth to water Yggdrasil's roots, maintaining the tree and, by extension, all of existence. This daily ritual held reality together. The past, Urd, informing the present, verdandi, to create the future, skuld. But here's what made the Norns truly terrifying to contemplate. They didn't weave possibilities or probabilities. They wove certainties, based on everything that had already occurred, based on every action taken and every word spoken and every choice made. They wove what must happen next, not what might happen, what will happen. This is the Norse concept of weird, or the Old Norse örlog, which is often mistranslated as fate or destiny, but actually means something closer to the way things have become, or that which has been laid down. It wasn't mystical predestination, it was consequence, the inevitable results of previous actions playing themselves out across time. Imagine dropping a stone into still water. The moment the stone touches the surface, ripples begin spreading outward. Those ripples will reach the shore. They must reach the shore. You can't stop them once they've started. That's wired. Every action is a stone dropped into the waters of reality, creating ripples that spread inevitably toward their conclusion. The Norse understanding was that the past determines the present, which determines the future, in an unbroken chain of cause and effect that no one, not even gods, could break. You can't change what you've already done, and what you've done creates consequences that compound forward through time. This worldview seems fatalistic to modern minds, but the Norse saw it differently. Yes, you couldn't escape the consequences of your actions, but you always controlled your actions themselves. You couldn't change what was coming, but you could absolutely choose how to meet it. The Nine Realms. The Nine Realms themselves represented different aspects of existence, different orders of being, all interconnected through Yggdrasil. Asgard stood highest, home to the Aesir gods who had won dominion through conquest and cunning. Here stood Valhalla, Odin's hall where the honored dead feasted and fought, preparing for Ragnarok. Here stood Gladsheim, where the gods held council. Here stood the high seat Lidskjalf, from which Odin could see into all 9 realms. Vanaheim was home to the Vanir, older gods of fertility, prosperity, and nature magic. The Aesir and Vanir had fought a long war that ended in peace and an exchange of hostages. Freya, and Njord coming to live in Asgard, bringing their wisdom of Edda, a form of magic associated with prophecy and shaping fate. Alfheim belonged to the Light Elves, beings of grace and beauty associated with light, air, and growing things. They were benevolent, artistic, and generally friendly to gods and humans alike. Midgard was the realm of humans, positioned literally in the middle of the cosmos. It was connected to Asgard by Bifrost, the rainbow bridge that trembled when beings crossed it but could bear any weight. Midgard was encircled by the great ocean, and in that ocean lay Jörmungandr, the world serpent, creating a boundary between the civilized human world and the unknown. Jotunheim was the land of giants, the Jotnar. These weren't just big people. They were forces of nature, chaos, wilderness, everything untamed and uncontrolled. The Jotnar were older than the gods and represented the world as it existed before civilization, before order. They weren't evil, exactly, but they were dangerous in the way that storms and avalanches are dangerous, powerful, unpredictable, and indifferent to human concerns. Svartalfheim, or Nidavellir, sources vary, housed the dark elves or dwarves, master craftsmen who lived underground and forged items of incredible power. They had created Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, Gungnir, Odin's spear, Gleipnir, the magical ribbon that bound Fenrir, and countless other artifacts that shaped the age. They were skilled but dangerous to deal with, prone to taking bargains too literally and holding grudges for perceived insults. Niflheim was the primordial realm of ice, mist, and cold, existing since before creation. From its well, Vergelmir, flowed the rivers that had given rise to the first giant, Ymir, whose body the gods would later use to create Midgard. This was a place of pure, sterile cold. Not death exactly, but the absence of life. Muspelheim stood as Niflheim's opposite, the realm of fire, existing since before creation in the cosmic void. It was guarded by Surtr, a fire giant who had stood at its borders since the beginning, waiting with his flaming sword for the day he would be released to burn all 9 realms. Muspelheim represented not just fire, but entropy, the eventual heat death that awaited everything. Helheim, or simply Hel, was the realm of the dishonored dead, those who died of sickness, old age, or accident rather than in battle. It was ruled by Hel, daughter of Loki, a goddess who was half living flesh and half corpse. This wasn't a place of punishment exactly, more a place of forgetting, of cold, halls desus and endless twilight, of existence without glory or purpose. These 9 realms formed a complex ecosystem, with beings constantly traveling between them, forming alliances and enmities, creating the relationships and conflicts that would eventually culminate in Ragnarok. The machinery of fate. Now here's where it gets interesting. Odin, the All-Father, king of the Aesir, was obsessed with knowledge. He had given up one of his eyes to drink from Mimir's well of wisdom. He had hung himself from Yggdrasil for 9 nights, pierced by his own spear, to gain knowledge of the runes. He regularly consulted with Völvas, seeresses, seeking prophecies and hidden knowledge. Through all this seeking, Odin learned about Ragnarok. He learned the specifics: who would die and how, which enemies would triumph, when the world would end. He learned that Fenrir would devour him, that Thor would kill Jörmungandr but die from its poison, that Surtr's flames would consume everything. He knew all of this with absolute certainty. And what did Odin do with this knowledge? He tried to prevent it. This is the crucial decision, the pivot point upon which everything turns. Odin knew what was coming and believed he could stop it. He gathered the greatest warriors who died in battle, the Einherjar, to fight at his side during Ragnarok. He forged alliances, created weapons, positioned his forces. He captured Loki's children and imprisoned them, trying to remove the threats before they could mature. But here's what Odin either didn't understand or couldn't accept. You can't prevent weird. You can't escape consequence. Every action creates reactions, and those reactions create more reactions, spreading like ripples through time. By trying to prevent Ragnarok, Odin was creating the very conditions that would cause it. The Norns weren't imposing an arbitrary fate. They were simply observing and recording the inevitable results of choices already made. When they wove that Fenrir would kill Odin, they weren't cursing Odin. They were noting that Odin's choices regarding Fenrir would inevitably lead to that outcome. Odin's fatal mistake was thinking that knowing the future meant he could change it. In the Norse worldview, knowing the future just meant you could see the consequences of your past actions more clearly. The path was already set by what you'd done. The Norns weren't writing your fate. They were reading it. But perhaps Odin had no choice. Perhaps his nature as a god of order, control, and wisdom compelled him to try anyway. Perhaps even knowing his efforts were futile, he had to make them because attempting to shape outcomes was simply who he was. This is the tragedy at the heart of Ragnarok. Even the wisest being in existence couldn't escape the consequences of his own nature. And those consequences began to manifest with a single death in a golden hall. a death so shocking, so seemingly impossible, that it shattered the god's illusion of safety and set in motion the chain of events that would end the world. Part 2. The Wound That Wouldn't Heal. Baldr the Beautiful in Asgard. Among all the flawed, violent, scheming gods, there lived one being who seemed too pure for the world he inhabited. His name was Baldr, son of Odin and Frigg, and he was everything the other gods were not. Where Odin was cunning and manipulative, Baldr was honest. Where Thor was violent and quick to anger, Baldr was gentle and slow to wrath. Where Loki was deceitful, Baldr spoke only truth. He lived in Breidablik, a hall so pure that nothing evil or unclean could exist within its walls. Literally, dishonest words couldn't be spoken there. Violent thoughts couldn't be sustained. It was as if goodness itself had been given architectural form. Everyone loved Baldr. Gods sought his counsel. Humans prayed to him. Even the giants in Jotunheim, those ancient enemies of the Aesir, spoke respectfully of Baldr when his name came up. He was beauty, wisdom, and kindness made flesh. He was what the gods might have been if power hadn't corrupted them. According to the sources, Baldr was also described as beautiful to behold, with skin so bright it seemed to glow, hair like spun gold, and a presence that brought joy simply by his being in a room. He was married to Nanna, a goddess of moon and joy, and they had a son named Forseti, who would become a god of justice and reconciliation. This perfection made what happened next all the more devastating. Baldr began having dreams. Not normal dreams, but vivid, prophetic nightmares about his own death. In Norse culture, dreams were taken very seriously. They were understood as glimpses of fate, messages from the Norns about what was woven on their loom. When someone dreamed clearly of future events, those events were considered certain to occur. Night after night, Baldr woke trembling, having seen his own death from different angles, in different ways, but always ending the same. In darkness, in cold, in Helheim, separated from everything he loved. The most perfect being in existence was being shown his impending death, and it terrified him. The gods held a council. Dreams like this meant the Norns had woven Baldr's death into fate. It was coming. The question was whether anything could be done about it. Frigg's impossible quest. Frigg, Baldr's mother, was herself a goddess of considerable power. She was associated with marriage, motherhood, domestic arts, and, crucially, foreknowledge. Like Odin, she could see the future, though she rarely spoke of what she saw. When Baldr's dreams began, Frigg understood immediately what they meant, and unlike Odin, who might have accepted this as inevitable wired, Frigg decided to fight. She embarked on what must have been one of the most ambitious quests in all of Norse mythology. She would travel to every single thing that existed and extract an oath from each that they would never harm Baldr. Not just living things, but everything. Fire, water, metal, stone, disease, poison, wood, all the plants, all the animals, everything that could conceivably hurt her son. Think about the audacity of this plan. Frigg was essentially trying to rewrite reality itself, to create an exception to natural law where Baldr was concerned. She was attempting to make one being invulnerable by getting all of existence to swear not to harm him. The journey took an indeterminate amount of time. Sources don't specify, but given the scope, it must have been months or even years. Frigg traveled through all 9 realms, speaking to fire and asking for its oath, speaking to iron and asking for its oath, speaking to stones, to trees, to diseases, to poisons, to every animal that walked or flew or swam. And remarkably, everything agreed. Everything swore the oath. "We will not harm Baldr." By the time Frigg returned to Asgard, Baldr had been made effectively invulnerable. Nothing in existence would harm him because everything in existence had sworn not to. And the gods, being gods, immediately turned this into entertainment. The game. It started simply enough. One god picked up a small stone and tossed it at Baldr. The stone bounced off harmlessly, not because Baldr was physically impervious, but because the stone refused to hurt him. It had sworn an oath, and the stone honored that oath. Another god tried with a larger stone. Same result. Someone threw a spear. It bounced off. Someone swung a sword. The blade refused to cut. Axes, arrows, thrown boulders, nothing could harm Baldr because everything had sworn not to. The gods found this delightful. They made it into a regular entertainment, gathering in the great hall while Baldr stood in their midst, smiling good-naturedly as they threw increasingly dangerous objects at him. Everything bounced off. Baldr laughed along with them. It became a celebration, a daily reminder that they had beaten fate, that even prophecy could be overcome with sufficient effort and creativity. Here's what the gods failed to notice. They were celebrating their ability to control fate while simultaneously enacting the pattern that would destroy them. They were so focused on having saved Baldr that they didn't see they were creating the conditions for his death, because someone was watching who didn't find this entertaining at all. Loki's investigation. Loki, that complicated figure who defies easy categorization, watched the games with calculating interest. Loki was counted among the Aesir, lived in Asgard, and was Odin's blood brother. They had mixed their blood in a ritual that made them more than friends, bound by sacred oath. Yet Loki was born of giants, married to a goddess named Sigyn, and father to several beings the gods considered monstrous. Loki's role in Norse mythology is endlessly debated by scholars. Was he evil? Was he chaos personified? Was he a trickster god serving necessary functions of disruption and change? The texts don't give us clear answers. What they do show is that Loki had a knack for finding weaknesses in systems, for identifying what others had overlooked, for asking uncomfortable questions that exposed hidden problems. As Loki watched the gods throw weapons at Baldr day after day, he knew something was wrong with the picture. Frigg was thorough. Everyone acknowledged that. But nobody's perfect. In a universe where she had to extract oaths from literally everything that existed, surely she must have missed something, must have overlooked some small thing. The question was what? Rather than asking the gods directly, which would have raised suspicion, Loki chose subterfuge. He transformed himself into an old woman, one of his many shape-shifting abilities, and went to visit Frigg in her hall. The text from the Prose Edda describes this scene with chilling simplicity. Loki, disguised, engaged Frigg in friendly conversation, eventually steering it toward Baldr and the remarkable games the gods were playing. "It's wonderful how nothing can harm him," the disguised Loki said casually. "Did truly everything swear an oath?" And Frigg, proud of her achievement and seeing no harm in sharing it with this friendly old woman, confirmed that yes, everything had sworn. Fire, water, metals, stones, trees, beasts, diseases, everything. Everything? Loki pressed gently, carefully. Even the smallest plant? Even the tiniest creature? Frigg laughed, a small laugh, almost embarrassed. Well, there was one small thing, a little plant growing on the east side of Valhalla, young mistletoe. I thought it too young and harmless to bother with. What harm could such a small, weak thing do? There it was, the flaw, the single overlooked detail in an otherwise perfect protection. One small plant that had not sworn the oath, one gap in the armor, one weapon that could still harm Baldr. Loki thanked Frigg for her hospitality and left. his mind already working on what came next. The mistletoe weapon. Loki found the mistletoe growing where Frigg had said, on the eastern side of Valhalla. It was indeed young and unimpressive, a parasitic plant living on a larger tree, drawing life from its host. It had soft wood, gentle leaves, and seemed utterly harmless. But in a universe where everything else had sworn not to harm Baldr, this one overlooked plant represented the only weapon that still could. The sources vary on exactly what Loki made. The Prose Edda says he fashioned a missile, Old Norse scot, from the mistletoe. Some translators interpret this as a spear, others as an arrow or dart, still others as a simple sharpened branch. The specific form matters less than the function. Loki created from the mistletoe something that, despite its humble origins, could accomplish what no sword or spear in all 9 realms could. It could harm Baldr. Here's where interpretations of Loki's motivation divide. Some scholars argue Loki acted out of pure malice or jealousy. He was a being of chaos, destroying a being of perfect order. Others suggest Loki was fulfilling a necessary function, that the gods' attempt to make Baldr invulnerable was itself a violation of natural law that needed correcting. Still others propose Loki was simply being what he was, a disruptor, a force that finds weaknesses and exploits them without necessarily understanding or caring about the broader consequences. The texts themselves don't tell us Loki's internal thoughts. They simply record what he did next. The blind god's throw with the mistletoe weapon prepared, Loki returned to the hall where the gods were gathered for their usual entertainment. Baldr stood in the center of the room, smiling as the gods threw objects at him. The hall rang with laughter and celebration. Everyone was having a wonderful time. Everyone except Hod. Hod was Baldr's brother, another son of Odin and Frigg. But Hod was blind, unable to see the spectacle, unable to participate in honoring his brother by demonstrating his invulnerability. The Prose Edda specifically mentions that Hod stood apart from the crowd, isolated by his disability, unable to join in the celebration. Loki approached Hod with false sympathy in his voice. "Why do you stand apart, Hod?" Loki asked. "Why don't you honor your brother like the others?" Hod's reply shows his frustration and sadness. "I cannot see where he stands, and even if I could, I have nothing to throw." "That's hardly fair," Loki said, his tone warm and helpful. "Here, I'll give you something to throw, and I'll guide your hand so you know where to aim. It's only right that you should honor Baldr like everyone else." Think about what's happening here. Loki was exploiting Hod's disability and his desire to participate, his wish to honor his brother. He was using Hod's blindness and social isolation against him, manipulating genuine affection into a weapon. Hod, grateful for this apparent kindness, accepted the mistletoe weapon from Loki. He let Loki position him, felt Loki's hand guiding his arm, directing his aim toward where Baldr stood in the center of the hall. Then, following Loki's guidance, Hod threw the mistletoe. The Prose Edda describes what happened next with devastating simplicity. The mistletoe pierced Baldr through and through, and he fell down dead. The laughter stopped. The celebration ended in an instant. The hall fell into absolute silence, the kind of silence that comes when something impossible has just happened, when reality has shifted in ways the mind can't immediately process. Then Frigg screamed. The Prose Edda says it was a sound of such pure anguish that it shook the foundations of Asgard. The other gods rushed to Baldr, but it was immediately clear there was nothing to be done. The light had gone from his eyes. His chest didn't rise. The most perfect being in existence, the most beloved god in Asgard, was dead, killed by the one thing his mother had overlooked, thrown by his own brother's unwitting hand, guided by the one god who had seen the flaw in their perfect protection, the aftermath. Hod stood trembling, his mind trying to process what had just happened. The text says he realized what he had done through the reaction of the other gods, through their sudden silence, their gasps of horror, through Frigg's scream. He had wanted only to participate, to honor his brother. Instead, he had become the instrument of the worst tragedy Asgard had ever known. Loki, seeing the chaos he had unleashed, quietly slipped away before the god's grief could transform into rage directed at him. For now, they didn't know he had orchestrated this. For now, he was safe. But the damage was done. The invulnerable god was dead. The son who had been protected by all of existence had been killed by the one thing existence had forgotten. The perfect being was gone, and with him went the gods' illusion that they could control fate, that their precautions were sufficient, that Ragnarok could be prevented. This is the moment everything changed. This is the wound that would never heal, the crack in Asgard's foundation that would eventually shatter the whole structure. Because Baldr's death proved that even with all their power, all their planning, all their efforts to reshape reality itself, the gods were still vulnerable. Fate, weird, consequence, could still touch them, and their response to this loss would directly cause the chain of events that led to Ragnarok. The journey to Hel. In her grief, Frigg asked if anyone would dare to ride to Helheim, the realm of the dead, and bargain with Hel herself for Baldr's return. This was no small request. The journey to Helheim was dangerous, and dealing with Hel was notoriously difficult. She was Loki's daughter, half living and half corpse, ruling a realm of shadows and forgetting with absolute authority. Hermod, another of Odin's sons, volunteered immediately. The Prose Edda describes how he mounted Sleipnir, Odin's 8-legged horse, himself born of Loki in a strange episode involving a giant stallion, and rode for 9 nights through dark valleys growing darker still, until he reached the gates of Helheim. The realm of the dead in Norse mythology wasn't hell in the Christian sense. It wasn't a place of punishment for sins. It was simply where those who didn't die in battle went. The Norse made a sharp distinction. Die in battle with weapons in hand, and Valkyries would carry you to Valhalla or Folkvanga to feast and fight until Ragnarok. Die of sickness, old age, or accident, and you went to Helheim, a cold, misty place of shadows where the dead lived in a kind of half-existence, neither truly alive nor entirely gone. Hermod found Baldr sitting in the high seat, the place of honor even in death. The Prose Edda notes that Baldr looked at his brother with sad eyes, but couldn't speak. The dead cannot address the living, without Hel's permission, and that permission was rarely granted. Hermod approached Hel and begged her to release Baldr. He described the grief in Asgard, the mourning throughout the 9 realms, the injustice of such perfection being cut down. He offered treasure, service, anything Hel might want in exchange for Baldr's return. Hel listened without expression, half her face beautiful and impassive, the other half corpse-like and rotting. When Hermod finished his plea, she finally spoke. "If it is true that Baldr is so beloved," Hel said, her voice like ice cracking, "if all of creation truly mourns him as you claim, then let all of creation prove it. I will release Baldr on one condition. If everything that exists, living and dead, animate and inanimate, weeps for Baldr, I will let him go. But if even one thing refuses to weep, he stays with me forever." It was a test, and perhaps a fair one by Hel's reckoning. If Baldr was truly as beloved as the gods claimed, if his death was truly such a universal tragedy, then everything should mourn him. And if everything mourned, Hel would release him. Hermod rode back to Asgard with this message, and immediately messengers were sent throughout all 9 realms. "Travel everywhere," the gods commanded. Ask everything to weep for Baldr. Prove to Hel that he is loved by all. The universal mourning, and everything wept. According to the Prose Edda, humans wept, gods wept, giants wept, even those who were enemies of Asgard, even those who had fought against the gods. They wept for Baldr because his death was a tragedy that transcended faction and alliance. Animals wept. Birds fell from the sky weeping. Fish in the sea wept. Plants wept, their tears becoming dew. Stones wept, their tears creating new springs. Fire wept. Water wept. Metal wept, the tears of iron creating rust. The very earth itself wept, and according to the sources, this is why we have so many springs and streams. They are the tears shed by the earth when Baldr died. The messengers traveled everywhere, to every corner of existence, and everywhere they went, everything wept. The success seemed universal. Surely Hel's condition would be met. Surely Baldr would be released. But then, in a cave at the very edge of the world, in the furthest, most remote place the messengers had yet reached, they found one final being they had not yet asked. A giantess named Thok, sitting alone in darkness. The messengers entered the cave and made their request. Weep for Baldr, so that he might be freed from Helheim. All of creation mourns him. All that exists has wept. We ask only that you do the same. Thok looked at them with cold, flat eyes. Her response, recorded in the Prose Edda, is chilling in its cruelty. Thok will weep dry tears for Baldr's funeral. In life or death, I had no use for him. Let Hel keep what she has. And Thok did not weep. Not a single tear. The messengers returned to Asgard with devastating news. One, being out of all creation, had refused to mourn. Hel's condition had not been met. Baldr would not be released. The identity of Thok later, much later, after investigation and interrogation and the application of various forms of pressure, the gods learned something that transformed grief into rage. Thok had been no giantess at all. Thok had been Loki in disguise. Loki had not only engineered Baldr's death by identifying the mistletoe and manipulating Hod into throwing it. He had also ensured that death was permanent by being the one creature in all of existence who refused to weep, thereby preventing Baldr's release from Helheim. The question of why remains unanswered by the sources. Was Loki simply ensuring his handiwork couldn't be undone? Was he committed to Baldr's death for some deeper reason? Did he believe the gods needed to learn they couldn't escape consequence? Or was he, as some interpretations suggest, fulfilling a necessary cosmic function, that Baldr's death was required for Ragnarok to occur, and Ragnarok itself was necessary for the cycle of death and rebirth to continue? The texts don't tell us Loki's thoughts. They only record his actions and the gods' response to discovering them. Loki's punishment. When the gods learned that Loki had orchestrated everything, the death and the permanent exile in Helheim, they hunted him down with single-minded fury. Loki fled, using all his tricks and transformations, hiding in remote places, changing forms constantly. But the gods were relentless. Eventually, they cornered him. The Prose Edda describes how Loki had built a house on a mountain with doors facing all directions so he could see anyone approaching. He spent his time there weaving a fishing net and watching for the gods. When he saw them coming, he threw the net into the fire to hide what he'd been doing. But the gods found the net's ashes and figured out its pattern, then used their own version to catch Loki in a river where he'd transformed himself into a salmon. Once captured, the gods' punishment was brutal. They took Loki into a cave deep beneath the earth. They took one of Loki's sons, Narfi, and in some versions they killed him, while in others they transformed his brother Vali into a wolf who then killed Narfi. They then took Narfi's entrails and, through magic, transformed them into unbreakable chains. With these chains, they bound Loki to 3 stone slabs deep in the cave. But that wasn't the extent of the punishment. Above Loki's face, they positioned a venomous serpent so that its poison would drip continuously onto him. The venom was agonizing. It burned through flesh and bone, causing pain beyond comprehension. Only one being showed Loki any mercy: his wife, Sigyn. Despite everything Loki had done, despite his role in Baldr's death and all the chaos he'd caused, Sigyn loved him still. She sat beside him in that dark cave with a bowl, catching the venom drops before they could fall on his face. But bowls fill. And when Sigyn's bowl filled with poison and she had to turn away to empty it, the venom would drip directly onto Loki. His screams of agony and his convulsions were so violent that they created earthquakes felt throughout all 9 realms. And there Loki would remain, bound and tortured, until the day when all bonds would break and Ragnarok would begin. The pattern becomes clear. Step back and look at what the gods had done. They learned that Fenrir would kill Odin, so they captured and bound Fenrir, creating his rage. They learned that Jörmungandr would battle Thor, so they threw the serpent into the ocean, where it grew large enough to be a real threat. They discovered that Hel would command armies of the dead, so they exiled her to rule Helheim, ensuring she would have resentment and an army when needed. And now, discovering that Loki had caused Baldr's death, they bound and tortured him, ensuring that when he eventually escaped, he would be filled with centuries of accumulated rage and pain. Every precaution was creating a future enemy. Every chain forged was becoming a weapon that would eventually be used against them. Every attempt to prevent Ragnarok was actually constructing the machinery that would cause it. The Norns hadn't decreed that Fenrir would kill Odin arbitrarily. They had observed that Odin's treatment of Fenrir would create rage, and that rage would eventually express itself through Odin's death. The prophecy wasn't mystical fate, it was observed consequence. This is the great irony at the heart of Ragnarok. The gods created their own apocalypse through their attempts to prevent it. Ragnarok wasn't inevitable until they made it so. But there was one more piece that needed to fall into place before the end could begin. One more sign that would signal that the machinery of doom was finally, irrevocably, in motion. That sign was the longest, darkest, most brutal winter the world had ever known. Part 3. The Fimbul Winter and the Breaking. The great winter descends. The world didn't end with fire and fury immediately after Loki's imprisonment. Instead, it ended slowly, incrementally, with a chill that seeped into bones and hearts alike. The first winter came as winters always did. Cold winds from the north, snow covering the fields, families gathering around hearths. But this winter didn't end. Spring never arrived. The sun grew dim in the sky, its light weak and watery, unable to melt the snow that piled higher and higher against longhouse walls. The Norse called it Fimbulwinter, the Great Winter. 3 winters with no summer in between. 3 years of unrelenting cold, of crops that never grew, of livestock that froze in their pens, of hunger that gnawed at bellies and reason alike. The Voluspa describes this time with brutal economy. Brothers will fight and kill each other, sisters' children will defile kinship. It is harsh in the world. Whoredom, rife, an axe age, a sword age. Shields are riven, a wind age, a wolf age, before the world goes headlong. No man will have mercy on another. This wasn't just a description of weather. It was a prophecy of social collapse. When food becomes scarce, when survival itself is threatened, the bonds that hold society together begin to fray. Brother turns against brother over a sack of grain. Families that once shared bread now hoard it jealously. The laws that governed behavior in times of plenty become meaningless when starvation looms. The Vikings understood this intimately. They lived in a harsh northern climate where survival depended on careful preparation, on stored food and communal cooperation. A single bad harvest could mean death for a settlement. 3 years without a harvest? That was extinction-level catastrophe. But here's what makes the Fimbulwinter more than just a natural disaster in the mythology. It was both consequence and catalyst. The consequence of Loki's punishment, his binding, the torture that would drive him to vengeance, had set cosmic forces in motion that couldn't be stopped. And it was the catalyst for what came next, because desperate, starving humans became easier prey for the darkness gathering at the edges of the world. The wolves that chase the sun every day since the beginning of time, the sun and moon had raced across the sky, pursued by 2 massive wolves. Their names were Skjöll and Hati, mockery and hate, and they were the offspring of an ancient giantess who bred nothing but monsters in the Iron Wood east of Midgard. For countless ages, the wolves had chased their celestial prey, but never quite caught them. The sun always stayed just ahead of Skjöll's snapping jaws. The moon always evaded Hati by mere moments. This eternal chase explained why the sun and moon moved across the sky at all. They fled in terror from the predators forever at their heels. But during Fimbulwinter, something changed. Perhaps the wolves grew stronger, fed by the chaos spreading through the 9 realms. Perhaps the sun and moon grew weaker, exhausted by years of flight with no respite. Perhaps this was simply the moment the Norns had woven into fate from the very beginning. The Prose Edda tells us what happened next with chilling simplicity. The wolves finally caught their prey. Imagine standing in a field during Fimbulwinter, wrapped in every piece of clothing you own, watching the weak sun struggle across the grey sky. You've watched this sun, feeble as it is, for 3 years, clinging to it as proof that the world still turns, that normalcy might someday return. Then one day, you see the wolf. It appears on the horizon, vast beyond comprehension, its form blocking out stars, its jaws wide enough to swallow mountains. And it leaps, and the sun, your sun, the light that has guided human existence since the first day, disappears into darkness. Skjöll swallows the sun. Hati devours the moon. The stars, every single point of light in the night sky, vanish as if they never existed. Absolute darkness falls across the 9 realms. This wasn't the darkness of night, where eyes adjust and moonlight guides. This was primordial darkness, the darkness that existed before creation, the darkness that the first gods had pushed back to make room for the ordered cosmos. And now it returned, reclaiming what had been taken from it. In that darkness, terror reigned. Humans couldn't see their own hands in front of their faces. They couldn't find their families, their homes, their livestock. The carefully ordered world they'd built dissolved into chaos. But humans weren't the only ones affected by the darkness. In the depths of the earth, in the heights of mountains, in caves and caverns and dark places where the gods' enemies had been bound, imprisoned, and forgotten, something stirred. The chains that held them, chains forged with magic, blessed by Odin himself, designed to hold until the end of time, suddenly felt less secure, because the end of time had arrived. The earth trembles. Yggdrasil, the world tree that held all 9 realms in its branches, began to shake. This wasn't an earthquake in the conventional sense, though humans certainly experienced it as such. This was something far more fundamental, the very structure of reality trembling, the foundations of existence cracking under unbearable strain. The Prose Edda says, "The ash Yggdrasil shakes, and nothing, whether in heaven or earth, is without fear." Think about what that means. Yggdrasil wasn't just large, it was infinite, or as close to infinite as made no difference. Its roots stretched down into the deepest wells of wisdom and power. Its branches held entire worlds. Gods walked its trunk as we might walk a forest path. It had stood unchanging, immovable, eternal since before time itself. And now it shook. In Asgard, the golden halls of the gods trembled. Warriors in Valhalla, the honored dead who'd been training for this exact moment, reached for their weapons as the walls groaned around them. Odin sat on his high throne Hlidskjalf, from which he could see all 9 realms, and watched the darkness spread with his single eye. He had known this was coming. He'd given up his eye for the knowledge of how it would end. He'd hung on Yggdrasil itself for 9 days and nights, suffering and starving, to gain the wisdom of the runes. He'd consulted Völvas, seeresses, who'd described every detail of Ragnarok in prophecy after prophecy. He had known, and he had tried to prevent it, and his prevention had made it inevitable. Did he understand the irony in that final moment? Did the Allfather, the god of wisdom, finally recognize that his wisdom had been his downfall? The sources don't tell us. They only tell us that he stood, that he donned his armor, that he took up his spear Gungnir, and that he prepared for the battle he knew he would lose. The breaking of chains deep beneath the earth. In the cave where he'd been bound for Baldr's murder, Loki felt the trembling. He felt his son's entrails, transformed into iron chains that held him fast, begin to weaken. He felt the serpent above him, the one that had dripped venom on his face for untold years, shift and hiss. Sigyn, his faithful wife who'd caught the venom in a bowl all this time, looked down at him with exhaustion and sorrow carved into every line of her face. How long had she stood there? Years? Centuries? Time moved strangely for the gods, but pain was always immediate, always real. "It's time," Loki said. Not a question, a statement. Sigyn said nothing. What was there to say? She'd known this moment would come. Everyone had known. That was the terrible nature of Norse fate. Not that it was hidden, but that it was absolutely clear and absolutely inescapable. She stepped away from the bowl. The venom fell directly onto Loki's face, and he screamed. A scream that shook the earth above, that rattled in the bones of every living thing, that announced to all 9 realms that the trickster was about to break free. The chains snapped. The rock that had held him dissolved. And Loki stood for the first time in ages uncounted, his face burned and scarred by venom, his eyes burning with rage and pain and terrible purpose. He had scores to settle. He had vengeance to claim. He had an apocalypse to lead. Far to the north, beyond the wall the gods had built to keep the frost giants contained, another prisoner felt the earth shake. Fenrir, the monstrous wolf bound in Gleipnir since he was barely more than a cub, strained against the magical ribbon that held him. Gleipnir had held because it was impossible, woven from the sound of cats' footsteps and other things that shouldn't exist. It was the strongest binding ever created. But Fenrir had grown in his captivity, not just in body, though he was now large enough to swallow the world itself, but in rage. Rage at his imprisonment. Rage at Tyr's betrayal. Rage at the gods who'd raised him only to chain him when they realized what he would become. That rage had been building for longer than humans had existed. And when Yggdrasil shook, when the foundations of existence cracked, Gleipnir finally gave way. The wolf stood. He opened his jaws. The Prose Edda says his lower jaw touched the earth, while his upper jaw scraped the sky, and he howled. It was the sound of prophecy fulfilling itself, of fate arriving on schedule, of cosmic justice finally being served. The gods heard that howl in Asgard, and knew the wolf was free, and he was coming for them. In the ocean that encircled Midgard, Jörmungandr stirred. The Midgard serpent had been growing for as long as Fenrir, coiled around the entire world with his tail in his mouth. The gods had thrown him into the sea when he was small, thinking the ocean would contain him. Instead, it had given him room to grow beyond all measure. Now, as the earth shook and the stars went dark, Jörmungandr released his tail. The Prose Edda describes what happened next. The serpent writhes in giant rage and causes the sea to surge onto the land. Imagine coastal villages watching the ocean recede, pulling back from shores it had touched since the dawn of time. Imagine the moment of confused hope. Perhaps the waters are retreating. Perhaps survival is possible, followed by the terrible realization of what's coming. The wave that struck wasn't just water. It was Jörmungandr himself, rising from the depths, his coils creating tsunamis that dwarfed mountains. He writhed toward land, spewing venom that poisoned everything it touched. Air, water, earth, flesh. Where his venom fell, nothing would ever grow again. And in Niflheim, the realm of ice and mist that had been given to Loki's daughter as punishment for her father's crimes, Hel prepared her army. She commanded all those who died of sickness, of old age, of misfortune. All the dishonored dead who hadn't earned a place in Valhalla or Folkvanga. For ages, they'd languished in her dark realm, neither alive nor truly dead, existing in a grey half-life that was more endurance than experience. Now Hel gave them purpose. She gave them armor, weapons, and a target. Asgard itself. The gods who'd cast her into darkness, who'd deemed her monstrous from birth, who'd sentenced her to rule over the forgotten and the dishonored. They would face the consequences of that sentence. The ship Naglfar, built entirely from the fingernails of dead men, which is why the Norse were careful to trim the nails of corpses. Every untrimmed nail contributed to building the ship that would carry the armies of the dead, broke free from its moorings. Loki himself took the helm. His children, Fenrir, Jörmungandr, and Hel, were all moving toward the same destination. The family the gods had torn apart was coming back together for one final, terrible reunion. The fire from the south. While darkness and ice threatened from the north and east, from the south came fire. Muspelheim, the realm of fire that had existed since before creation, had always been closed to the gods. Its ruler, Surtr, was older than Odin, more ancient than the first generation of deities. He'd stood at the wall of fire that guarded his realm since the beginning of time, holding his flaming sword and waiting. Just waiting. The Völuspá describes him. Surtr comes from the south with the scourge of branches. The sun of the battle gods shines from his sword. When the earth shook and the stars went dark, Surtr moved. He led his fire giants, the sons of Muspelheim, who'd been held back by divine decree since the dawn of time, across the rainbow bridge, Bifrost, toward Asgard. Bifrost was beautiful, a shimmering road of light that connected the realm of gods to the realm of men. It was also strong, built to withstand the marching of armies, blessed and protected by Asgardian magic. It shattered like glass under the weight of Surtr's army. The Prose Edda tells us plainly, Bifrost breaks beneath them. The rainbow bridge, symbol of connection between gods and humanity, symbol of divine access and blessing, destroyed in moments by fire older than memory. Heimdall, the watchman god stationed at Bifrost to guard against exactly this kind of invasion, blew his horn Jarlarhorn. The sound echoed through all 9 realms, a warning, a call to arms, an announcement that the final battle had begun. In Valhalla, the Einherjar, Odin's army of chosen dead who'd been feasting and training for centuries in preparation for this exact moment, rose from their benches. These were the greatest warriors who'd ever lived, men and women who'd died with weapons in hand, who'd been personally selected by Odin's Valkyries to fight in Ragnarok. They'd trained for this. They'd known it was coming. Every day in Valhalla, they'd fought mock battles, died and been resurrected, honed their skills specifically for this final confrontation. They were ready. But even as they marched out of Odin's hall, even as they formed ranks and prepared for battle, they must have wondered, if the gods themselves were fated to fall, what chance did mortal warriors, even the greatest who'd ever lived, really have? The convergence at Vigridr. All across the 9 realms, the forces were moving toward a single destination. Vigridr, the battlefield where prophecy said the final confrontation would occur. The Prose Edda describes it as a field called Vigridr, 100 leagues in every direction. 100 leagues. That's roughly 300 miles in every direction. A battlefield so vast it could contain all the armies of gods, giants, monsters, and the honored dead, with room for them to wage war on a cosmic scale. From Asgard came Odin and the Aesir, all the gods who'd ruled since the dawn of time. Thor with his hammer Mjolnir. Tyr, the one-armed god of war, ready to face Garm, the hound that guarded Hell's gates. Freya, the god of fertility and prosperity, who'd once given away his sword to win the hand of the giantess Gerda and would now face Surtr weaponless. From Valhalla came the Einherjar, 800 warriors pouring through each of the hall's 540 doors. That's 432,000 warriors total, according to the Grim Nismal. The greatest army of heroes ever assembled, every single one prepared to die for a second and final time. From the north came Fenrir, jaw scraping heaven and earth, eyes burning with rage. Behind him came the frost giants of Jotunheim, ancient enemies of the gods finally unleashed. From the east came Loki, steering Naglfar and leading Hel's army of the dishonored dead. His children joined him, Fenrir, Jörmungandr, and Hel herself, with her legions from Niflheim. From the south came Surtr and the fire giants, their bodies blazing with heat that melted stone and boiled the sea. Surtr's sword alone was described as being brighter than the sun, a blade of pure fire that had waited since before time began for this moment. The armies converged on Vigridr as the ash Yggdrasil trembled and groaned. The world tree, which had held everything together since the first gods raised it from the body of the giant Ymir, was dying. Its roots burned in fire. Its trunk cracked with frost. Its branches, which held entire worlds, began to wither and break. And in the center of that dying tree, at the Well of Erd, where the Norns had woven fate since the beginning of time, the 3 sisters looked at the final thread they'd been weaving toward for countless ages. Erd, representing what was. Verdandi, representing what is. Skuld, representing what shall be. The thread reached its end. They cut it, and every soul in the 9 realms felt that cut like a physical blow, the sensation of fate itself being fulfilled, of the story reaching its conclusion, of time running out. The darkness was absolute. The armies faced each other across the field of Vigridr. Heimdall's horn still echoed in the distance, its sound gradually fading into terrible silence. And then, in that silence, Odin spoke. The Allfather, the god who'd sacrificed everything for wisdom, who'd hung on a tree and given his eye, and learned the runes and consulted every prophet and seer, who'd tried desperately to prevent this moment, raised his voice. What did he say? The sources don't record his words. Perhaps there were no words adequate to the moment. Perhaps he simply gave the order that had been inevitable since the beginning. The final battle began. Part 4. The Final Battle. Odin and the Wolf. Odin, All-Father and King of the Gods, rode at the head of his army mounted on Sleipnir, his 8-legged steed. He wore his golden helmet and carried Gungnir, the spear that never missed its mark. Around him rode the Einherjar, their weapons gleaming even in the darkness, their war cries echoing across the field of Vigridr. And facing him across that vast battlefield was Fenrir, the wolf he'd ordered bound as a pup, the beast whose rage the gods themselves had created through fear and betrayal. The Prose Edda is specific about what happened next. Odin advances to fight against Fenrir, not to fight against the giants, not to face Surtr or Loki or any of the other enemies arrayed against Asgard. Odin went straight for the wolf. Perhaps he thought he could change fate even now, even at this last moment. Perhaps he believed that if he could just defeat Fenrir, the prophecy might be broken, the ending rewritten. After all, he was the god of wisdom, the one who'd learned the secrets of the runes, who'd drunk from the well of Mimir and gained knowledge beyond any other being in the 9 realms. Or perhaps he simply understood that some endings are written in stone, and the only choice left is to face them with dignity. Fenrir saw Odin coming. Did the wolf remember being a cub in Asgard, being fed by the gods, being raised by the very beings who would eventually chain him? Did he remember Tyr, the only god brave enough to approach him, the one he'd trusted enough to place his hand in the wolf's mouth as a pledge of good faith? Did he remember the feeling of those chains tightening, the realization of betrayal, the long ages of imprisonment with nothing but rage to sustain him? If he did, his actions showed no mercy for memory or nostalgia. The wolf opened his jaws, lower jaw against the earth, upper jaw scraping the sky, and advanced. Odin charged, Gungnir leveled at the beast's heart, Sleipnir's 8 legs covering the distance at supernatural speed. The spear that never missed struck true, piercing Fenrir's chest. It wasn't enough. Fenrir's jaws closed around Odin. The All-Father, the god who'd created humans, who'd won the mead of poetry, who'd led the Aesir for time beyond counting, disappeared into the wolf's throat. Sleipnir fell. Gungnir clattered to the ground. The king of the gods was dead. The Einherjar who'd witnessed this, the warriors who'd trained for centuries specifically to fight at Odin's side, must have felt their courage falter. If the All-Father himself could fall, what hope did any of them have? But one god didn't falter. Vidar, Odin's son, a deity so silent that he's sometimes called the Silent God, saw his father die and moved immediately to avenge him. The Prose Edda describes what happened next with methodical detail. Vidar steps forward and sets one foot on the lower jaw of Fenrir. On this foot he has the shoe about which stories have been told through all ages. This shoe, built from scraps of leather, pieces that had been collected from every shoemaker throughout human history, remnants from every boot and sandal ever made, was the strongest footwear ever created. It had been made specifically for this moment, another attempt by the gods to prepare for the prophesied end. Vidar placed that shoe on Fenrir's lower jaw and grabbed the wolf's upper jaw with his hands. And then, with strength described as coming from deep rage and deep grief, he tore Fenrir's jaws apart. He ripped the wolf's mouth open until the beast died, choking on its own blood. The prophecy was fulfilled. Fenrir killed Odin. but the prophecy also contained its own revenge. Vidar killed Fenrir. Neither victory changed the outcome of the battle. They simply ensured that certain deaths happened in a certain order, that fate unwound exactly as the Norns had woven it. Thor and the Serpent. Elsewhere on the battlefield, Thor faced his ancient enemy. Thor and Jörmungandr had encountered each other before. The most famous incident involved a giant named Loki, who'd challenged Thor to lift his cat. The cat, of course, was actually Jörmungandr in disguise, and Thor managed to lift it only slightly. But even that small achievement was remarkable, since their serpent encircled the entire world. On another occasion, Thor went fishing with a giant and used an ox head as bait. Jörmungandr took the bait, and Thor nearly pulled the serpent from the ocean, nearly killed it then and there. But the giant, terrified of what might happen if the Midgard serpent died before Ragnarok, cut the fishing line. Now, finally, they would settle their rivalry permanently. Jörmungandr writhed across the battlefield, his coils crushing armies of gods and giants alike, his venom spraying in great arcs that poisoned everything it touched. The air around the serpent shimmered with toxicity. Warriors who came too close died simply from breathing the fumes. Thor, undaunted, advanced. He carried Mjolnir, his hammer that always returned to his hand after being thrown, the weapon that had killed more giants than any other in existence. The god of thunder, the strongest of the Aesir, the protector of both Asgard and Midgard, faced the beast that embodied chaos and dissolution. The battle between them shook the earth. Every time Mjolnir struck Jörmungandr's scales, thunder echoed across all 9 realms. Every time the serpent's tail smashed into Thor, mountains crumbled. They fought as primordial forces, less like individual beings, and more like fundamental aspects of reality in conflict. Order versus chaos, protection versus destruction, the defender versus the devourer. The Völuspá describes the conclusion in stark terms. Then comes the great son of Hlodin. Thor, Odin's son, goes to fight against the serpent, slays in rage the guardian of Midgard. Thor won. Mjolnir crashed into Jörmungandr's skull one final time, and the serpent died. Its massive body convulsed, its coils loosening from around the world, its venom finally ceasing to pour from its fangs. Thor had killed his greatest enemy. He had fulfilled his role as protector. He had won. And then he took 9 steps backward. The Prose Edda counts them precisely. 9 steps. Not 8, not 10. Exactly 9, a number sacred in Norse mythology, a number that appears again and again in the myths. From the 9 worlds to the 9 nights Odin hung on Yggdrasil to the 9 mothers of Heimdall. Thor took 9 steps, poisoned by the venom that covered him, that he'd inhaled during the battle, that had seeped into every wound. He fell to his knees. The strongest of the gods, the one who'd never been defeated, who'd protected gods and humans alike from every threat, who'd killed more giants and monsters than could be counted, died there on the battlefield with his enemy's corpse coiled nearby. His death fulfilled the prophecy. Thor and Jörmungandr would kill each other. The protector and the threat would destroy each other simultaneously, leaving the world without either. The other deaths, across the vast battlefield of Vigridr, other prophesied deaths unfolded with terrible precision. Tyr, the one-armed god of war, the one brave enough to feed Fenrir as a cub and place his hand in the wolf's mouth when the others fled, faced Garm. This monstrous hound, bound at the entrance to Hel's realm until Ragnarok, was described as the best of dogs in the Grimnismal, though best in this context meant most fearsome, most terrible, most devastating. Garm had broken free when Yggdrasil trembled, his chain, like all the other binding chains, finally giving way. Now he tore through the armies on the battlefield, his jaws crushing warriors in their armor, his howls driving lesser fighters to madness. Tyr met him with sword drawn, the god who'd sacrificed his hand to bind Fenrir, who'd accepted mutilation to protect the realms, who embodied the concept of honorable warfare and keeping one's word even at terrible cost, fought the beast that guarded the dishonored dead. They killed each other. The sources are brief about this combat, giving it less detail than Odin's death or Thor's battle. Perhaps this reflects the nature of Tyr himself, a god who did what was necessary without needing glory or extended storytelling, who fulfilled his function and died doing it. Heimdall, watchman of the gods, the one with hearing so acute he could hear grass growing and wool growing on sheep's backs, the one who'd stood guard at Bifrost for ages uncounted, faced Loki. This confrontation carried layers of meaning. Heimdall represented order, duty, vigilance, everything Loki was not. Throughout the myths, Heimdall appears as Loki's opposite. Where Loki brings chaos, Heimdall maintains structure. Where Loki deceives, Heimdall observes and reveals truth. Where Loki destroys bonds, Heimdall guards boundaries. In one famous myth, when Loki stole Freyja's necklace, Brisingamen, Heimdall pursued him. They fought in the form of seals on a rock, and Heimdall won, returning the necklace to its owner. That confrontation was a preview of this final battle. Now they met again, and this time neither would walk away. They fought with the intensity of ancient rivals, each attack and counterattack echoing previous confrontations, previous victories and defeats across ages of conflict. The Prose Edda simply states, Heimdall and Loki kill each other. No extended description of their combat exists in the surviving sources. We don't know if they spoke before fighting, if they acknowledged their long rivalry, if they expressed anything beyond the violence of their final confrontation. We know only that they were equals in this moment, perfectly matched, each capable of killing the other, and each doomed to die in the attempt. When they fell together, their blood mixing on the battlefield of Vigridr, the trickster and the watchman ending their eternal dance. Freya, the god of fertility, peace, and prosperity, faced Surtr. This matchup was particularly tragic because Freya had once owned a sword that fought by itself, a weapon so powerful it could win any battle without its owner's direct control. But he'd given that sword away, traded it for the right to marry Gerda, a giantess he loved desperately. Now, weaponless except for an antler, according to some sources, Freya faced the fire giant who wielded a sword described as being brighter than the sun, who commanded armies of flame, who'd waited since before time began specifically for this battle. The outcome was never in doubt. Surtr's sword cut through Freya, and the god of growing things, the deity who represented life and renewal and the cycles of the seasons, died by fire. His death was particularly symbolic. Freya was associated with the Vanir, the older group of gods connected to nature and fertility. His death at Surtr's hands represented not just the defeat of a single god, but the destruction of the natural order itself, the burning away of everything that grows and lives and renews. With Freya's fall, the last defender fell. There was no one left to stand between Surtr and his ultimate goal. Part 5. The world burns. Surtr's fire. Surtr stood victorious on the battlefield of Vigridr, surrounded by the corpses of gods, giants, monsters, and heroes. His fire giants stood with him, their bodies blazing, their weapons dripping molten rock. And then Surtr raised his sword, that blade of primordial fire that had waited since before creation for this exact moment, and he set the world ablaze. The Voluspa describes what happened next. Surtr flings fire over the earth and the whole world burns. Not just Midgard, the realm of humans. Not just Asgard, the realm of gods. All 9 realms, every world hanging in the branches of Yggdrasil, every place that existed within the ordered cosmos, burned. Fire consumed the golden halls of Asgard. Valhalla, where the Einherjar had feasted for centuries preparing for this battle, collapsed in flames. The high seat Hlidskjalf, where Odin had sat to watch all 9 realms, melted like wax. Bifrost, already shattered by Surtr's arrival, dissolved into sparks and ash. The fire spread to Midgard. Human settlements that had survived Fimbulwinter and the darkness and the chaos of social collapse now burned. Longhouses, towns, farms, everything humans had built over countless generations turned to ash in moments. The survivors, those who'd lived through 3 years of winter and the apocalyptic battle, died in the flames. In Jotunheim, the realm of giants, the mountains themselves burned. The ancient fortresses of the frost giants, constructed from ice that should have been eternal, melted and evaporated. In Niflheim and Muspelheim, realms of ice and fire that had existed since before creation, the fundamental elements warred against each other one final time. Even Yggdrasil, the world tree that had stood unchanging since the dawn of time, burned. Its roots shriveled in the heat, its trunk blackened and cracked, its branches, which held entire worlds, broke and fell, sending those worlds tumbling into the flames below. The Norns, well of Erd, where fate had been woven, dried up. The sacred waters where the gods had held council, where judgments had been passed and oaths had been sworn, evaporated into nothing. The 3 sisters, Erd, Verdandi, and Skuld, if they still existed, watched their thread reach its absolute end. The earth sinks. As Yggdrasil died, something even more terrible happened. With the world tree gone, there was nothing to hold the 9 realms in place. Nothing to maintain the structure of the ordered cosmos, nothing to keep the primordial void, the Ginnungagap that had existed before creation, at bay. The realms collapsed. Not just burned, but fundamentally ceased to exist as distinct places. The careful separation the first gods had created, pulling Midgard from Ymir's body and structuring the cosmos into 9 distinct worlds, dissolved. The earth sank into the sea. Not just coastlines flooding or islands disappearing, the entire world sinking, pulled down into water that rose to meet it. The Völuspá describes it. The sun goes black, the earth sinks into the sea, the bright stars fall from the sky. Those stars that had disappeared when Sjöll and Hati devoured the sun and moon, now they literally fell, tumbling from their places in the firmament, extinguished like dying embers, leaving absolute darkness behind. Every human who'd ever lived was dead. Every god was dead or dying. Every giant, every elf, every dwarf, every being that had existed within the ordered cosmos was gone. The monsters were dead. The heroes were dead. The honored dead of Valhalla were dead for a second and final time. The 9 realms, which had been home to countless stories and countless lives, which had contained all of existence as the Norse understood it, ceased to be. There was only fire, and then water, and then darkness, and silence. Absolute, perfect, eternal silence. The meaning of destruction. Ragnarok was complete. The prophecy was fulfilled. The ending that the gods had tried so desperately to prevent had arrived exactly as predicted, with every detail matching what the Völvas and the Norns had foretold. The world had ended, and in that ending, we might ask, was there any meaning, any purpose, any point to all the struggle and sacrifice and suffering? Based on what we know from the sources, the Norse didn't see Ragnarok as punishment for sin, the way Christian apocalypse narratives often frame the end times. The gods didn't fail because they were immoral or corrupt, though they certainly had their flaws. The world didn't end because humans were wicked and deserved destruction. Instead, Ragnarok represented something different. The ultimate consequence of actions taken, the final playing out of choices made, the end result of a pattern that had been set in motion from the beginning. Remember, the gods created this apocalypse by trying to prevent it. Every precaution became a weapon. Every chain became a cause for rage. Every attempt to control fate made fate more inevitable. This reflects the Norse concept of weird, that intricate web of cause and effect, of actions and consequences, of past deeds creating future circumstances. Weird wasn't arbitrary predestination. It was the recognition that every action ripples forward, creating conditions for what comes next. The gods bound Fenrir, creating his rage. That rage, given enough time and pain, would inevitably express itself. The Norns didn't decree arbitrarily that Fenrir would kill Odin. They observed that the pattern of binding and rage would lead to that outcome. The prophecy was simply clear-sighted observation of consequence. This is why the gods couldn't prevent Ragnarok, even though they knew it was coming. You can't escape the consequences of your own actions by taking more actions that create more consequences. Every attempt to prevent the end made the end more certain. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because in some versions, the ones that appear in later source, possibly influenced by Christian ideas of resurrection and renewal, Ragnarok wasn't the final ending at all. It was a beginning, a part 6, the world reborn, the survivors in the silence and darkness after Ragnarok, after every realm had burned and sunk beneath the waves, after every god and giant and human had died. Something impossible happened. Life persisted. The Völuspá describes it. She sees, coming up a second time, earth from the ocean, eternally green. The waterfall plunges, an eagle soars above it, hunting fish on the mountain. The earth rose from the sea. New land emerged from the waters, fresh and green, covered in vegetation that had never known the touch of Surtr's fire. Waterfalls cascaded down mountainsides. An eagle, symbol of keen sight and divine overview, hunted over pristine waters. The world had been reborn. But who would inhabit this new world? Who survived to see this second creation? According to the sources, several gods lived through Ragnarok. The Prose Edda specifically names them. Vidar, who killed Fenrir to avenge Odin. Vali, another of Odin's sons. Modi and Magni, Thor's sons, who inherited their father's hammer Mjolnir. These gods would form the core of a new pantheon, carrying forward some memory of what had been lost. Even more remarkably, the sources suggest that Baldr and Surtr, the murdered god and his unwitting killer, returned from Helheim after Ragnarok. The death that had started the chain of events leading to the apocalypse was somehow undone in the aftermath. The brothers who had been torn apart by Loki's manipulation were reunited in a new age. This detail is particularly striking from a storytelling perspective. It suggests that Ragnarok wasn't just destruction, but transformation, that what was lost could, in some form, be recovered. The perfection that Baldr represented, destroyed by the god's own paranoia and Loki's malice, could exist, again in a world that had learned from its mistakes. But gods alone couldn't populate a world. What about humans? Leif and Leifthraza, the Prose. Edda tells us that 2 humans survived Ragnarok, sheltered from the destruction in a place called Hod Mimis Holt, Mimir's Wood. Their names were Lif and Liftrasir, which translate to life and eager for life, or life yearner. These weren't heroes who'd earned special protection through great deeds. They weren't royalty or warriors or anyone particularly special. They were simply two people who happened to find shelter in the right place, who survived when everyone else died, who carried within them the seed of humanity's future. The sources tell us they hid themselves in this wood during the fire of Surtr, suggesting it was their own choice and action that saved them, not divine intervention. And after Ragnarok, they emerged to find a world empty of other humans, but full of potential. The morning dew was their food, according to the Völuspá. They would repopulate the world, becoming the ancestors of a new human race, starting civilization again from nothing but memory and hope. Think about what this means. Every human on this new earth would be descended from these two survivors. Every story, every lesson, every piece of knowledge about the old world would have to be transmitted through them. They carried the weight of an entire world's history and culture in their memories. What did they tell their children about the old world? Did they speak of gods and giants, of the great winter and the final battle? Did they explain why the world had ended, what mistakes had led to Ragnarok? Or did they focus on hope, on the new beginning, on building something better than what had been lost? The new Asgard. The surviving gods gathered at Idavöllr, the central plain of what had been Asgard. The Völuspá describes them finding golden chess pieces in the grass, remnants of games the Aesir had played in the old world before everything burned. These pieces represented continuity, a tangible link to what had existed before. The gods sat down and recall mighty events and the ancient runes of the ruling god, as the text says. They remembered. They discussed. They honored what had been lost while building what would come next. This council of surviving gods would create new halls, new rules, new ways of ordering the cosmos. But would they make the same mistakes? Would they try to control fate as Odin had? Would they bind potential threats preemptively as their predecessors did with Fenrir and his siblings? The sources don't tell us. The story of what happens after Ragnarok is frustratingly brief compared to the detailed accounts of what led up to it. We're left to imagine what kind of world these survivors might build, what lessons they might have learned, what changes they might implement. The new sun. One particularly beautiful detail appears in the sources. Before the old sun was swallowed by Sjöll, it gave birth to a daughter. This new sun, equally bright and beautiful, would illuminate the new world. She would follow the same path her mother had traced across the sky, pursued by the same wolves, if those wolves survived, or perhaps finally free to shine without fear. This image of cosmic continuity, the sun birthing a daughter before dying, ensuring light would return to the world, captures something essential about the Norse understanding of Ragnarok. It wasn't pure destruction. It was transformation, death making way for rebirth, the old order collapsing so a new one could emerge. Different endings. Here's where we need to acknowledge something important about Norse mythology. The sources don't all agree on whether rebirth actually happens. The most detailed account of Ragnarok comes from the Völuspá, which describes both destruction and renewal. The Prose Edda, written by Snorri Sturluson in the early 13th century, includes the rebirth narrative as well, but some earlier sources mention only the destruction. They describe the burning of the world, the death of the gods, and nothing after, just ending. Some scholars suggest the rebirth narrative was added later, possibly influenced by Christian ideas of resurrection and a new heaven and earth. In this interpretation, the original purely pagan version of Ragnarok had no happy ending. just an acknowledgement that all things end, even gods, even worlds. Other scholars argue that the rebirth was always part of the story, that Norse culture understood cycles of destruction and renewal as fundamental to existence, that the agricultural societies of Scandinavia would naturally see endings as preludes to new beginnings. We can't know for certain which interpretation is correct, because we don't have access to truly pre-Christian Norse sources. Everything was written down after Christianity had arrived in Scandinavia, after the original oral traditions had been filtered through centuries of retelling, and the influence of a new religion that had very specific ideas about apocalypse and resurrection. What we can say is this: both versions of the ending, pure destruction and cyclical rebirth, reveal something true about the human experience. Sometimes endings are just endings. Sometimes disaster destroys everything without offering hope of recovery. And sometimes, impossibly, life finds a way to continue, to rebuild, to start again. Perhaps the Norse told both versions because both were true in different circumstances, in different tellings, for different audiences with different needs. And Part 7. The lasting meaning. What Ragnarok teaches us. So what does Ragnarok mean? What can this ancient Norse apocalypse myth teach us, if anything, thousands of years after it was first told? At its core, Ragnarok is a story about consequences. It demonstrates that every action creates ripples into the future, that attempts to control outcomes through fear often create the very disasters we're trying to prevent, that wisdom without humility can be as destructive as ignorance. The gods knew what was coming. They had every advantage: foresight, power, immortality, access to magical weapons and protective measures. They consulted seers, made careful plans, bound their enemies, tried everything they could imagine to prevent the prophesied end. And every single precaution made the apocalypse more certain. This suggests something profound about fate and free will in Norse thought. The future isn't fixed by arbitrary divine decree. It's shaped by the consequences of present actions. Weird, that complex web of cause and effect doesn't care about intentions. The gods meant well when they bound Fenrir. They were trying to protect Asgard, trying to keep Odin alive, trying to preserve their world. But good intentions don't erase consequences. Binding Fenrir created the rage that would eventually kill Odin. The protection became the threat. The prevention became the cause. We see this pattern throughout human history. Nations build weapons to ensure peace and thereby guarantee future wars. Individuals try to control loved ones and destroy relationships. Societies create laws to prevent certain behaviors and thereby create new forms of criminality. The harder we grip, the more slips through our fingers. Ragnarok teaches us that security based on controlling others, on binding potential threats, on preventing possible futures through force, is an illusion. Real security, if such a thing exists, comes from different sources: trust, genuine relationship, acceptance of uncertainty, willingness to live with risk. The god's fatal flaw. Odin's great flaw was believing that wisdom meant control. He sacrificed everything, his eye, his comfort, his time, to gain knowledge of the future. And what did he do with that knowledge? He tried to prevent it. He tried to bind fate itself. This is hubris on a cosmic scale. It's the assumption that because you know what's coming, you have the right and ability to change it through force. It's the belief that you're smart enough, powerful enough, important enough to reshape reality to your preferences. But reality doesn't care about your preferences. Consequences don't respect your authority. Fate, weird, the intricate web of cause and effect that connects all actions across time, cannot be controlled. only navigated. The gods could have made different choices. When prophecy said Fenrir would kill Odin, they could have treated the wolf with kindness, earned his loyalty, worked to ensure the prophecy didn't come to pass through building relationship rather than imposing chains. When they learned of Loki's role in Baldr's death, they could have sought justice without torture, could have addressed the underlying issues rather than simply punishing the symptom. But they chose control over connection. They chose binding over befriending. They chose punishment over understanding. And those choices created Ragnarok. The modern relevance. We live in a time when this lesson feels particularly urgent. Powerful nations bind others with economic sanctions and military might, then wonder why resistance grows. Parents control children through fear and manipulation, then face estrangement and rebellion. Societies build walls and cages, creating more anger and desperation than they contain. The pattern repeats because humans, like the Norse gods, struggle to learn that control is an illusion, and that attempts to impose it often create the very disasters we fear. Climate change offers a particularly stark parallel. We knew, scientists have known for decades, that our actions were creating catastrophic consequences. We had foresight, just as Odin did. And like the gods binding Fenrir, we took half measures, implemented inadequate controls, tried to prevent disaster while maintaining the systems creating it. The prophecy of climate apocalypse isn't mystical fate. It's scientific observation of consequence. We've bound carbon in the atmosphere as the gods bound Fenrir, creating a rage that will eventually be released. And each year of inadequate response, each compromise that prioritizes short-term gain over long-term survival, tightens the chains while the threat grows stronger. Ragnarok teaches us that knowing disaster is coming doesn't save you if your response to that knowledge makes the disaster worse. The question of hope. But here's where the rebirth narrative becomes important, even if it was added later, even if it wasn't part of the original pagan telling. The idea that something survives, that life persists, that two humans can shelter through the apocalypse and emerge to find a green earth rising from the sea. This offers something essential. Hope not that we can prevent endings, but that endings aren't final. Leif and Leifthrasyr didn't prevent Ragnarok. They didn't fight in the final battle. They didn't have magic weapons or divine parentage. They simply survived by hiding, by being in the right place, by perhaps being lucky or careful or both. And then they rebuilt. They started over. They created a new humanity from the ashes of the old. This suggests that when systems collapse, when old orders fall, when everything we've built burns down, life finds a way forward. Not by clinging to what was, not by trying to resurrect the old world exactly as it was, but by starting fresh, learning from mistakes, building something new. The surviving gods found the golden chess pieces in the grass and remembered the old world. They honored what had been lost. But they didn't try to recreate Asgard exactly as it was, that Asgard had led to Ragnarok. They built something new, informed by memory, but not constrained by it. This is perhaps Ragnarok's most important teaching. When endings come, and they always eventually do, survival depends not on preventing change, but on adapting to it. Not on controlling outcomes, but on navigating consequences. Not on binding threats, but on building relationships that can weather transformation. The final irony. Let's return to where we started. The gods tried to prevent the apocalypse, and every action they took to stop Ragnarok brought them one step closer to the destruction they feared. This is the story's central irony, its deepest truth, its most devastating insight. They weren't stupid. They weren't careless. They tried everything they could think of. They used all their wisdom, all their power, all their foresight and preparation. And they failed, not in spite of their efforts, but because of them. This is what makes Ragnarok so powerful as a myth. It's not about heroes too weak to save the world. It's about powerful beings who destroyed their world through the very actions meant to save it. We are all the gods in this story. We all face uncertain futures. We all try to protect what we love. We all make choices that seem reasonable at the time, but create unintended consequences. We all bind things we fear and wonder why they rage against us. The question Ragnarok asks us is simple but profound. What chains are you forging right now? What Fenrirs are you creating through your attempts at control? What apocalypse are you building through your efforts at prevention? And perhaps most importantly, can you learn to live with uncertainty without trying to bind it? Can you face the future without trying to control it? Can you love without chains, protect without imprisonment, prepare without assumption that your preparation will save you? These are the questions the Norse asked themselves around fires on long winter nights, telling stories of gods who failed to prevent the end. These are the questions that make Ragnarok relevant 3,000 years after it was first told. Because the apocalypse isn't something that happens once at the end of time. It's a pattern that repeats whenever we try to prevent consequences through control, whenever we bind what we fear, whenever we mistake foresight for the power to reshape fate. Ragnarok is happening now, in small ways and large, every time someone learns the wrong lesson from prophecy. Every time someone sees disaster coming and responds by tightening their grip rather than changing their behavior. Every time someone mistakes control for security and creates the very enemy they feared. The gods chained Fenrir, and Fenrir killed Odin. Cause and effect, action and consequence. The wolf wasn't evil, he was enraged, and his rage was reasonable, and his revenge was predictable. And still, the gods were surprised. Don't be surprised, don't be the gods. Learn what they couldn't, that prevention through control is an illusion, that consequence cannot be chained, that wisdom without humility leads to destruction. And learn the second lesson too, that endings aren't final, that life persists, that even when everything burns, something survives, that Leif and Leifthrasyr will emerge from shelter to find a green earth rising from the sea, that the daughter of the sun still shines, that golden chess pieces lie in the grass, waiting to be found. That memory and hope together can build a new world from the ashes of the old. Ragnarok is both warning and promise. It teaches us what not to do, and shows us that even when we fail, even when the worst happens, something survives to try again. The world ends. The world is reborn. The cycle continues. And we, like the gods before us, must choose. Will we bind Fenrir and create our own destruction? Or will we learn to live with uncertainty, to navigate rather than control, to accept that fate, weird consequence, comes for us all, and that our only choice is how we face it? The chains are breaking. The earth trembles. The wolves chase the sun. The question is, what will you do with the time you have before the end? And what will you carry with you into whatever comes after?